кризовий медіа-центр.
UCMC continues its working day, and the topic of the next press conference is the presentation of the free of charge register of the National Public Officials online instrument, and that is for public control over the financial operations of Ukrainian officials. Our speakers are Daryna Kaleniuk, Igor Gaievskyi, and Andriy Shuran.
Я передам слово Дарині, прохання до всіх спікерів.
Please do not hurry up, because we have this simultaneous translation going on. Good morning to everyone. This topic sounds very boring and technical, but it has very applied effect. Why do we need to have the database of PEP? And that was from the moment we got that idea when we were creating the Center for Combating Corruption in 2011-2012, when we were infuriated by the fact that the senior civil servants never get punished. We knew of some public facts about their corruption transactions, corruption schemes, and these corruption schemes they were implementing via foreign international banks. For example, Kluyev brothers were opening the account in the Bank of Austria, and the Bank of Austria was servicing them. In the same way, the company of Alexander Yanukovych opened the accounts in Switzerland and Germany.
Контори, так звані, які насправді
They were providing services to these companies which have very doubtful origin of the income, of the revenues. The servicing of such capital is the direct violation of international standards. These are international standards introduced by FATF, and they are implemented in the directives of the European Union, of every country where the rule of law works. The standards say that banks have to check the client. If someone comes to open the account, this either physical person or legal entity, and the bank then has to identify the client to understand who's behind this legal entity. If this is the Daisy company, for example, the bank has to check who's the real physical person that founded and registered this Daisy company, for example. After the bank identifies the physical person, the bank has to check the risks and the physical person. If this is a politically exposed person, which is a senior civil servants, their relatives, their allies, then the bank has to put the red tick that this is the client with the high risk, and automatically the bank has to check where this client gets money from. If there's any doubt that this money could be of some corruption origin, then this is the grounds to inform the financial intelligence unit or financial body that there are some signs of money laundering. All these materials which are informed by the bank become the basis for criminal case abroad and in Ukraine. However, foreign banks were avoiding this necessity to introduce this international standard. They were saying, listen, yes, we have to check whether our client is a politically exposed person or not, but we need some database. We have the database of terrorists of the UN, of American Special Services. This is the public database. And when some client comes to us, we check this client against this database. Give us the database of PEPs. And then we will be able to check. Otherwise, we are sorry, we're using the publicly accessible information. The fact that there's no such a database, it helps the banks, they close eyes to servicing risky clients. This is the way for them to avoid responsibility. That is why we decided that we have to create such a public register of PEPs. We did it in both Ukrainian and English. First of all, it is for foreign financial institutions, but at the same time, it's the instrument for Ukrainian banks, for Ukrainian financial institutions. Till October 2014, Ukrainian banks, and in Ukrainian legislation, there was no requirement to check the client, whether the client is a politically exposed person or not. The bank could open the account for the solar company of Klyuev brothers, and this company wouldn't be considered risky. The accounts of Klyuev brothers had transactions for the amount of about 800 million euros. And the banks had no obligation to monitor these accounts. In 2014, the new law was passed under the pressure of IMF, and that is on counteraction to legalization of the income. And there is a requirement there to check the origin of money of PEPs. But again, Ukrainian banks were saying, give us the database. How would we know? Is that the politically exposed person? We cannot monitor all these websites, all media. It is expensive for us to use some international database, and then we say, okay, we've done that for you. Our first objective is to systematize the information from the state bodies, from state companies, from judicial institutions about who are these PEPs in Ukraine. For Ukrainian banks, together with the Committee on Financial Monitoring, we organized several presentations, and most of Ukrainian banks know about this database. They're very much interested in that, and the banks would request us to get this system implemented in their system. For them, this is probably the only open public resource. They can check whether the client is a politically exposed person or not. That's our first step. The database functions in beta version. We are just checking all the information. We have more than 10,000 names here. Our next step will be to systematize all the public information about most risky publicly exposed persons. Please enter the name of the head of the fiscal service, Mr. Nasirov, for example. And in Ukrainian media, there are many publications about Nasirov, about his business, about his family. For banks, this information is of importance, but not a single bank abroad will be systematizing this information and will be taking the facts from mass media, which could result in a certain reaction from the bank. In this extended dossier on Nasirov, we put the information about non-declared apartments in London. Here it says that he did not include them into his tax return, even though in official sources and public registers in Great Britain, his name is mentioned as the owner, as the leaseholder of these apartments. Then we have the description of different businesses related to Nasirov. He has the father-in-law who has a big construction business. His income grew up very seriously after Nasirov has become the head of the fiscal service, and we put it in the database. Then all the ties, first of all, relatives, family and close relatives, the wife, the brother, his sons, his father. Then we show his business contacts, business relations. Nasirov was the assistant of the Member of Parliament Zubko Gennady, who is now the Vice Prime Minister. And all these facts are publicly available, so we just register it, we put it into this single system. The more information we have in this database, the more we will see interrelations and the more risks the banks will be able to identify. This information is duplicated in Ukrainian and English, and it's confirmed from different sources. Then there is the attachment, the tax return, the declaration. Almost all politically exposed persons, they have their declarations, and these are declarations for minimum 2 last years. You can compare these declarations. And further on, when we have this electronic system of declaring in Ukraine, this will be a powerful resource so that the banks could compare what is in declaration and what's happening in the accounts of that person. In the end, I would like to say that for us, the priority is to fill in this extended database. We will select some priority politically exposed persons who are famous. They're infamous because of their suspected corruption activities. And having access to different state-registered open data, we will systematize all the information about them, which has some legal facts, which could help block their accounts in Ukraine and abroad, which can complicate all the transactions. For example, this case of Gaievskyi, $30 million were taken out of the state bank, withdrawn from the state bank during the transaction that involved not just Ukrainian banks, but Swiss banks and Panama companies. The Swiss banks if they were able, if they had the access to such a database, and if they had the information about who Gaievskyi is, that he is the publicly exposed person, they wouldn't allow this transaction. They would have blocked that information and informed the Financial Intelligence Unit. Our final objective is to make life difficult for those who are involved in money laundering and who are trying to then launder this money in Bolivia and use this money for luxurious life in the countries of the European Union. I would
like to give the floor to Igor Gaievskyi, who is representing the State Financial Monitoring Service, and we worked together with this service, compiling our database, because this is their responsibility to keep records on the official public figures, and this is their responsibility to prevent money laundering. As far as I know, you have more than 100 banks who are your customers requesting data about this information. Thank you, Daryna. Major role of our service defined by Ukrainian legislation and international norms is to prevent money laundering and to prevent fraudulent financial operations. Another part of our work is to provide methodological support to all stakeholders of the anti-corruption reform. And we are happy to have Center for Counteraction to Corruption among our partners, because this allows us to work further on rather problematic issue about political figures. I would like to explain a bit why it is problematic. For Ukraine, political figures are actors with a high degree of risk. Because when such political figure comes to any bank should be able to see immediately that this is a high-risk client, that this potential client is very corruption sensitive. In Ukraine, we do not have so many categories of risky clients. These are just political figures, officially recognized terrorists, also international financial institutions with whom there are correspondent relations, and those clients from the East, especially Middle East and other countries which do not work within the framework of international anti-money laundering system. This means that when a potential client comes to bank, a bank has to check whether this client is a client of potential high risk. That is, the bank has to ask whether you are public figure or you are a client of the another banking system, etc. And the third is the fact that the bank has to recognize the source of the transaction. That is the requirement which should be applied absolutely to all clients. So the first step for the bank is to understand whether new client is politically exposed person or no. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, for a long period of time, our private banking sector had no database to identify who are political figures, who are politically exposed persons. In Western countries, they have Lexis networks, Dow Jones list, but for our banks, they are very expensive. On the one hand, on the other hand, they do not contain enough information about our local political figures, politically exposed persons, and they are of limited use for Ukraine. That's why the database of politically exposed persons is of primarily importance for Ukraine. It provides a lot of information about public figures. It is free of charge, and for us, as for the financial intelligence, it shows business and personal relations of this relations and ties. Also, this database might be useful for international banks, but not only of international banks. It is useful for all stakeholders in the financial monitoring system. These are not just banks. These are insurance companies. These are asset management companies. These are all stock exchanges, solicitors, auditors, etc. Now, all those stakeholders can use the database to understand whether potential client is a political figure or not. Because for them, for all of those categories, this is an obligatory requirement to understand whether the client is a politically exposed person. Also, I would like to mention that on our website, we have these methodological recommendations explaining in detail how to identify political figures. It summarizes international experience, and it also contains databases containing useful information for those who identify politically exposed persons. And I would like to wish our partners successful updating and upgrading of this database, because the main factor of the database success is to update it in timely manner. Andriy is responsible for maintaining the database, for updating it, and I would like to give the floor to Andriy, who will explain all the fields in this database. I would like to remind you that in its beta version, this site has a so-called broad database. That is, we have called all politically exposed persons, that they are PEPs, and Would you please help us with internet access? Okay, so there is a problem with internet. Here we will show you the presentation. First, we presented this database in Austria, in Vienna, in the National Bank of Austria, where we had the representative of the National Bank of Ukraine. And when this representative have heard about this database, his question was, "Do you have me in this database, and what information do you have about me in this database?" Andriy, will you please show your slides and explain what people may find in this database?
You've said almost everything I wanted to say. You explained it all well. Now we will talk about the content. We have bilingual profile. For each PEP, we have more than 10 versions of transliteration that is related to foreign transactions, but our banks also would be interested. The last name, first name, and patronymic could be translated in different versions. We have about 3,000. We have declarations for about 3,000 PEPs. We have documentarily confirmed data, the replies from different state bodies that this or that personally exposed person holds certain position. We have information about sanctions and criminal cases, but not for everyone. Talking about what's in there, about 80% that these are official replies, and about 15-20% that's the data from official websites. We have the basic profile information that we received from a certain state body. That's the name, last name, first name, patronymic, the position. We have about 2,500 judges, starting from this administrative court to the courts of appeal. We have more than 1,000 heads of state enterprises, civil servants of the first and second category, up to 500 heads of different law enforcement bodies, about 80 persons, the ambassadors about 80, and heads, members of parties, 230, the members of parliament of the last two convocations. Basically, about, you've seen this, the profile, that's Nasira, but that's the screenshot, the tree of relations, Kluyev Azara, but that's not the complete tree. The basic family relations, business relations, declaration again. As Daryna said, we have the data for the last 4 years, for some people the data for the last 2 years. In the nearest future, we are planning to check 5,000 more declarations, talking about the sources of information. Again, you see 70% 9, and the declarations take 15%. Also, you can write us, give us some information about a specific personally exposed person. If, for example, you know that we don't have this person in our database, and you know that he's the personally exposed person, civil servant. We received a phone call from the press service of the Prime Minister yesterday. And they looked at the profile of the Prime Minister and they had some remarks. They wanted to say they have the website of Yatsenyuk and it has a lot of information. They requested us to transfer all that information because there were all the declarations. So we made these corrections. If there is such desire from the Prime Minister, we will include his priority, his profile into priority profiles. There is an interest, there is a feedback, and there is a desire to cooperate. The presentation was also the database for the National Bank. The National Bank should help to introduce this system of control, and we will transfer partially our data to them so that they can use them in their programs in the bank. We have information about more than 10,800 PEPs, and we are planning to update this information. Igor wished us success, but basically this is very critical moment when we will have to send the requests again, and we will have to update all this information. But in any case, we have to do that. A little bit about statistical information. This is our first presentation, basically. All financial institutions know about us, but this is our first public presentation. We have about 600 sessions a day, and about 57% of them are new users. Most of them are looking at Ukrainian, Russian versions, but also there are users who are from Great Britain, from the US. And what is also important, the decision was made that for financial institutions we will be providing in a certain format the data that we have in a database in order for them to, so that it's easier for them to monitor. They can introduce this information into their systems. We're actively deciding on what will be the format, and maybe we will sign some agreement with every financial institution. That's free of charge, but that is for our internal statistics. And the format of data, probably we will not invent anything new. It will be similar to terrorists on a state website. That's it. I will add that there's an ability that you can search by country, for example, Great Britain, and you see the cases where some publicly exposed persons were founding some companies, buying apartments via Great Britain or Austria or Latvia. And also you can search by legal persons, legal entities. And that if these are companies, so we will be adding some facts to that. That's it. If you have any questions, please ask. We are open for proposals, for critical comments, and the feedback of the users. We are processing all the feedback, and we're improving, we're upgrading our database. We want this product to be the product that will be used not just in Ukraine but abroad. And basically, Ukraine is a pilot country. There's not a single other country that would have the database, public database of personally exposed persons. We will be ready to transfer such product to our partners. If someone wants to do that in Russia or other countries where there are many risky transactions, the countries where the money is laundered. If you have any questions. Thank you.
З цим
Thank you, colleagues. We wish you a lot of success with this your project. Since there are no further questions, let's wrap up the press conference, and thank you for coming.